The hospital is within walking distance. John said this as he went so far as to let Tiffany out of the car. Surprised by the sudden event, my mother-in-law calmly took the passenger seat while John took the driver's seat. "Well, that's how it is. Since I've made up with your father, we three will enjoy a reconciliation trip to Hawaii," she said, and then they just drove off. What a situation. I was lost for words, too taken aback by the suddenness of what had just occurred. "I'm sorry." With a cracked voice, Tiffany spoke to me, snapping me back to reality. At that moment, nothing else seemed to matter, and I immediately called a taxi to take Tiffany to the hospital, focusing only on that. And so, I was burning with a flame of anger, vowing never to forgive them. John and my mother-in-law must have never imagined I would take such bold action at that time. I vowed revenge in my heart against John and my mother-in-law for neglecting their family. My name is Angela Clarkson. I am currently 42 years old, and I work as a nurse. My husband, John, is 3 years my senior at 45 and works as a regular office employee. Our daughter, Tiffany, has just turned 10 and is a quiet child who enjoys reading alone at home or during school breaks. In my 20s, due to my job, I had almost no social interactions with the opposite gender, and I never even attended mixers because I was focused on advancing my career. Then, just after I turned 30, a friend who was too nervous to go to a matchmaking party alone insisted I accompany her, despite my lack of interest. That's where I met John. He laughed and said he had been so focused on his work that he had missed the chance to marry. I felt a strange sense of familiarity with him, and before I knew it, we had exchanged contact information. Talking to him, I found John to be a very kind person, with a stable job and income. He was understanding of my irregular nursing shifts, which inevitably drew me to him. John felt the same way. "I want to know more about you, Angela." I was very happy to hear him say that. Thus, we were attracted to each other and started dating with marriage in mind, and I got married at the age of 31. We conceived Tiffany almost immediately after marriage, and I gave birth to her at 32. Since we both agreed that one child was enough, we did not try for more children after that. And so, 10 years have passed to the present day. A vile threat was looming over me. One day, John said this: "My mom will be coming to stay with us from tomorrow. So, please take care of the rest." Shocked by the sudden announcement of cohabitation, I could not hide my agitation and asked in a bewildered voice, "What do you mean?" "It's troubling to suddenly hear that your mother is coming to stay." According to John, it seemed that his parents had a fierce argument, and during the argument, his mother declared, "I'm leaving," and began packing her bags. Naturally, the only place for a woman in her 60s to go was to her only son, John. And so, he suddenly announced that his mother would be coming to stay with us from the next day. Honestly, I was against the idea of living with even my own parents, let alone in-laws, and protested strongly. It's one thing if she needed care, but coming to our house almost like running away from home after arguing with your father? Are you ignoring our situation? Please rethink this. John seemed to take my objection badly and retorted with a displeased face. "Do you hate living with my mom that much? Huh, I never thought you were so cold." I couldn't admit obviously that I did hate to. John's face was too frightening, and I shrank back, swallowing the words that had reached the tip of my tongue, and instead glared at him. Thinking I wouldn't talk back, John smugly said, "Humph, don't even bother resisting from the start. Just prepare the room for my mom to use immediately. Firstly, since this house is a rental, we need permission from the landlord or the management company to increase the number of occupants. The lease is in my name because I receive a housing allowance, so naturally, I would have to handle this. Moreover, we live in a 2-room apartment. One room is used by Tiffany, and the other is our bedroom. Sorry, but there's no room available in our current situation." John then said something astonishing with a nonchalant attitude. "Then, move Tiffany out and let her study or something in the living room. That way, we can make sure she's doing good on her grade. It's a good solution." She's just a primary school student. She doesn't need her own room, that's a luxury. So, Tiffany will be living in the living room for a while. I felt dizzy at such a horrible suggestion. How can you say such a thing? Are you prioritizing your mother over your own daughter? Huh? I didn't say that exactly, but I owe my mom for raising me. So, that's how it is. Despite my protests, John was unmoved, and as soon as Tiffany returned, he told her, "Your room will be used by Grandma from now on. So, start packing your stuff right away." I rushed to stop him, but Tiffany said it was okay and began moving her belongings to the living room. Watching her back, my heart ached, and my hatred for John seemed to swell. Lately, John neither does housework nor contributes much to living expenses, and he has been coming home late at night. I had been patient because Tiffany is still only 10, but seeing his attitude today, I felt as if I had finally reached a breaking point. And the next day, as expected, my mother-in-law arrived in the evening and exclaimed, "What is this filthy place? Expecting me to live here, has John lost his mind? This is outrageous." Just as my mother-in-law arrived, our neighbor returned home and gave us a curious look, so I hurriedly entered my house with her. I contacted the management company and was told that as long as the stay is short-term, there is no need for special procedures, just reporting is sufficient. Therefore, I honestly hoped my mother-in-law could return home as soon as possible, preferably within 2 weeks. However, my wish was shattered. First, the large suitcase my mother-in-law brought. Seeing this, I felt disheartened, thinking she planned to stay for at least a month. She walked into the room without any regard for me and looked around as if she was inspecting the place. Then, she opened the fridge and exclaimed, "What is this? The fridge is almost empty. Do you think my John and granddaughter can get enough nutrition from this? Really, Angela, you're no good." I had planned to go shopping today, but because my mother-in-law suddenly said she was coming, I had to clean up right after work and didn't have time to shop. In times like these, ordering takeout should be the solution. Lately, John has been saying that takeout tastes better than my cooking, along with other sarcastic remarks and complaints. I had become defiant. "Mother, shall we order some takeout today?" I asked her with the biggest fake smile I could muster. However, she snapped at me again. "What? I won't allow takeout. A mother and wife who doesn't cook is worthless. Go shopping now, and prepare a main dish, 5 side dishes, soup, and dessert." Saying that, she threw a shopping bag and purse at me and slammed the door shut. Immediately, I heard the TV blasting at high volume and my mother-in-law laughing loudly from inside. I sighed deeply, not knowing how many times I had done so already. An hour later, I returned from shopping and was shocked to see the living room. My daughter Tiffany, who had returned home, was doing her arithmetic textbook in the living room, while my mother-in-law was watching her like a hawk from behind. If Tiffany made a mistake, she would shout, "That's wrong." Or, "Why don't you understand? You're such a bad child. Ah, I wonder who she takes after." I quickly intervened between them. She just started learning this recently. And, you know, even primary school students have programming classes now. It's not good to judge by old values. I defended Tiffany and admonished my mother-in-law, but she wouldn't listen and said dismissively, "Ha! It would have been better if she took after the intelligent John." Tiffany looked downcast, so I immediately cheered her up. "It's okay, Tiffany. Just go at your own pace." While saying this, I glared at my mother-in-law. However, it had no effect on her, and she started snacking on treats angrily because I talked back. A week after my mother-in-law's arrival, I couldn't take it anymore and voiced my complaints to John. "I'm sorry, but I can't overlook this any longer. Please do something about your mother. It's one thing for her to make snide remarks at me, but it's unfair to Tiffany." John retorted with a dissatisfied look and a harsh tone. "Huh? Why? You're getting help with the housework, so don't act so high and mighty. It's Tiffany's fault for not being able to study, right? She's the biggest victim here, taking after her not-so-smart mother. I was furious and fought back for once. Normally, I would avoid further discussion to avoid the hassle, but I couldn't stand him talking about Tiffany like that. And in front of John, my mother-in-law acted as if she was the nicest person in the world. When I was busily moving around, she would come up to me with a smile and say, "Oh, Angela, you sit down and have some coffee. I'll take care of the rest." She pretended to help with the housework, but in reality, she did nothing, leaving me to do everything later. Despite this reality, was John blind? He believed his mother was helping me, so I confronted him with all the frustration I had been holding back. "So, your priority is not Tiffany but your mother, huh? Are you okay with your mother criticizing your own child and not feeling anything?" I couldn't stand it even if it was your own mother. John provoked me with a laugh. "Ah, my mom is always right. Well, unlike me, a university graduate, you're just a nursing school graduate, so it's no wonder Tiffany can't do well in studies or sports." How pitiful. At that moment, I felt something snap inside me. However, I thought it childish to lash out in anger, so I laughed and said, "Okay, I understand." A month later, Tiffany, who usually wakes up early even on holidays, stayed wrapped in her futon and complained of feeling sluggish when I spoke to her. Remembering that there was an epidemic spreading at school, I took her temperature, and it was over 100 degrees. When I hurried to tell John, surprisingly, he was getting ready to leave. Frozen in shock, John nonchalantly said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, but I'm going to Hawaii with my parents." I hadn't heard such a thing before, but at that moment, it didn't matter. Normally, John commutes by train, so we only have my car. Ignoring John, I tried to take Tiffany to the hospital, which was open even on holidays, but then John and my mother-in-law appeared with their suitcases and uttered an unbelievable statement. "The hospital is within walking distance." John said this and, unbelievably, let Tiffany out of the car. Surprised by the sudden event, my mother-in-law casually took the passenger seat while John took the driver's seat. "Well, that's how it is. Since I've made up with your father, we'll enjoy a family trip to Hawaii for 3. She said, and then they just drove off. Shocked by the sudden turn of events, I was at a loss for what to do until Tiffany said with a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry." At that moment, nothing else mattered to me. I immediately called a taxi to take Tiffany to the hospital, focusing only on that. And so, I was burning with a flame of anger, vowing never to forgive them. John and his mother could never have imagined I would take such bold action. I cursed them in my heart for neglecting their family. 2.5 hours later, my phone was buzzing with persistent calls from John. I didn't want to answer, but ignoring him wouldn't change anything. So, with a heavy sigh, I finally answered the phone. Before I could speak, John screamed in a voice like a cry for help. "Please, help me." Wondering what happened, it turns out that John had a solo car accident on the way to the airport. In fact, my car is a manual transmission. John does have a license for manual vehicles, but it seems he forgot how to drive one since he commutes by train. However, he couldn't admit he was unsure about driving a manual car, especially in front of his mother. Of course, I have proper insurance, set to cover spouses too, in case John might drive. So, there's nothing illegal about John driving the car. Regardless, since John took the car against my wishes, I thought the accident was his own fault. As I was thinking this, John said the next words. "The accident took so long to deal with, and now the flight time is getting close. It's your car, so you deal with it. It's all because this car is so hard to drive. It guzzles gas for nothing, and what's so good about this clunker anyway?" He started complaining, but it sounded more like the whining of a loser to me. Reaching the point of not caring anymore, I said with a smirk, "So what? You knew my car was a manual, right? You took it and drove off on your own. The responsibility for an accident lies not with the owner but with the person who was driving. Oh, you hit a guardrail, didn't you? Then, you'll be paying for the car's repair costs out of your own pocket. And of course, you'll also be compensating for the guardrail. After saying that, I hung up the phone. The phone kept ringing persistently after that, but I was at the hospital. Tiffany was told she needed further tests, as her condition was different from the common epidemic, and we were waiting for that. I had no time to deal with such selfish people, so I ignored the calls. Then, a notification for an email came in. Thinking John had switched to messaging since I wasn't answering the phone, I checked my smartphone and frowned upon seeing the sender's name. I thought my in-laws had joined forces with John, but while my mother-in-law was sending desperate pleas for help, my father-in-law's message read, "What happened?" Surprised, I replied only to my father-in-law, and that's when a shocking truth was revealed. Turns out, my father-in-law hadn't even heard about any trip to Hawaii. He was enjoying his day with his chess friends when he got a call from my mother-in-law about the accident, asking to be picked up. He thought it was just a prank for attention since she wouldn't say more than, "Just come," and seemed to believe Tiffany and I were with them, hence his worried message. Thinking that Tiffany and I were also involved, he sent an email out of concern. "Why did you reply to me, and not the two of them?" I immediately called my father-in-law to ask, and his answer was unexpected. "Just a hunch. Anyway, I'm currently separated from them, and just remembering recent events makes me not want to deal with it." Did my wife cause any trouble? He didn't even know his wife was staying with us, thinking her whims had merely dragged him into trouble. I swallowed hard and explained the situation slowly. "Your wife is currently staying with us. Today, she said she was going on a family trip to Hawaii with you and John and left for the airport." After I told him about the treatment my daughter and I received just before they left, he fell silent. After a pause, he finally spoke in a tone I had never heard from him before, low and serious. "That's unforgivable." About 30 minutes after talking with my father-in-law, a doctor called us to discuss Tiffany's condition. It seems Tiffany has acute gastroenteritis and needs to be hospitalized for a while. I sighed in relief and also felt guilty for the stress I must have caused Tiffany. Luckily, a private room was available for her. "How are you feeling, Tiffany?" "We got a private room, so rest up." I tried to sound cheerful when talking to Tiffany, but she looked guilty and apologized. "I'm sorry. It's my fault you're having a hard time, Mom. I'll fall behind in my studies because I'm hospitalized." "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I rushed to her side and hugged her gently, reassuring her. "I'm not raising you because you're good at studying, but because you're my precious child. Live as you are, Tiffany." After that, my father-in-law contacted us upon arriving at the hospital, and Tiffany, who has always been Grandpa's girl, was overjoyed. They started chatting happily, discussing things like Tiffany's prize-winning painting contest, which he had boasted about to his chess friends. Then, an unwelcome call came in. "John and my mother-in-law. Because you didn't help, we missed our flight. We can't cancel, so the trip's money is as good as gone. You compensate for the trip costs for all three of us." My mother-in-law joined in, wailing. "We had a chance to make up with your father." I was outside the hospital talking, but their voices were so loud they sounded like they were on speaker. Then, my father-in-law, who had followed me, casually said, "Well, I wasn't invited to any Hawaii trip. There seems to be a third person, but who could that be? Not Tiffany, not Angela, and not me." Who, indeed? Neither of them expected my father-in-law to be there. They started to panic. "Wait, why is Dad at Angela's?" His voice, even through the phone, sounded weak and pale. I pointed out that they had lied and that my father-in-law had seen through it, contacting me directly. Then, my mother-in-law started making excuses. "Well, inviting your father was a lie. So this trip was just for the two of us." Stop prying. It was practically an invitation to be suspicious. Against such an obvious lie, I couldn't help but laugh as I retorted. "No, what are you saying? I just checked, and the reservation clearly says for 3 people. They were speechless, suddenly falling silent. Recently, Tiffany had told me that my mother-in-law was using my computer while I was away, searching for something about Hawaii. I wasn't sure of the details, but she mentioned Hawaii searches. So, out of desperation, I logged into the travel booking site I'm registered with to look for any clues, and I hit the jackpot. I discovered that my mother-in-law had made a booking for 3 people under my name without my permission. This was confirmed after checking the credit card statement, which had already been charged. In other words, I was the one who suffered financial damage. Yet, John had the audacity to complain about cancellation fees. Furthermore, the fact that 3 people were booked was evidence, so I asked who the third person, present there, was. Still, John continued to deny it. My mom must have made a mistake with the number of people. So, it was really supposed to be just 2 of us. Oh, really? John sighed in relief after my response. Since the trip is cancelled anyway, come to the location I'm about to tell you. We'll discuss what happens next there. After saying that, I hung up. I told Tiffany I'd be back and left for a nearby diner to wait for them with my father-in-law. A while later, when the 2 showed up, John started complaining for some reason. The guardrail compensation isn't covered by compulsory insurance, so handle it with your insurance. I couldn't believe what John was saying and retorted. What? You're the one who hit it. It's your fault for not paying attention, so you pay out of pocket, right? What nonsense are you spouting? Staring him down, John recoiled a bit. Then, my mother-in-law chimed in. That's not important right now. So, Angela, what did you want to talk about? Being somewhat grateful for her attempt to move things along, I said. I checked, and the dash cam showed not only you, my mother-in-law, and John in the driver's seat but also an unknown young woman in the back seat. Their faces tensed up at my words. Actually, the dash cam installed in my car is quite high-tech. It allows for real-time video checking via a smartphone app. Of course, it's also possible to review past footage directly from my smartphone. The car is a pretty good model, so having robust security measures in place, especially for theft prevention, has paid off. I hadn't imagined this security feature, installed in case of theft, would uncover John's infidelity. Lying about going with your parents and actually planning to bring your mistress? Thanks for leaving such clear evidence. Their faces turned even bluer in contrast to my smile. They probably thought removing the SD card would erase the evidence. I revealed that I had been suspicious of John's behavior and had been gathering evidence of his affair. I had planned to confront him with divorce once I had solid proof, but then my mother-in-law moved in, and Tiffany fell ill, delaying my plans. I had been contemplating divorce from the start. The 2 remained silent, unable to respond, until my usually quiet father-in-law spoke up. Like mother, like son, huh? Mother, you can't say much because you've been cheating with a younger man yourself, right? John, unaware of this, was shocked and looked at my mother-in-law, who was embarrassed by her affair being exposed in a public place. At your age, being deceived by a much younger man. And you thought you were in love? Talk in your sleep. My usually quiet father-in-law revealed his deep anger. It seems the reason my mother-in-law left home was this, ultimately her own doing. Yet, she had the audacity to blame my father-in-law, claiming she did nothing wrong before shamelessly moving in with us. Disgusted, I couldn't help but look at my mother-in-law with scorn. I won't interfere in your affairs. But John, of course, we're getting divorced and I'll have custody. Expect to pay child support and compensation, as well as covering the accident repair costs and the Hawaii trip. John then apologized, not caring about the onlookers. Okay. I'll pay for everything. Just don't contact her, please. The reason I heard was astonishing. It turns out John's mistress was the daughter of a crucial client for his company, and she had no idea John was married. My mother-in-law, liking that the mistress came from wealth, unashamedly suggested deepening their bond with a trip together. The innocent party took this seriously and even lavished praise on John for his driving of the old manual car, as seen on the dashcam footage. Puffed up by the praise, John's carelessness led to crashing into a guardrail. My father-in-law and I could only exchange looks and wry smiles at such a ridiculous cause of the accident. He told them to sort things out themselves and then parted ways, eventually leading to John contacting me. If it gets out that I was dating the president's daughter under false pretenses, I'm definitely getting fired. Please, I'll do everything you say. Just don't tell her, okay? We're still husband and wife, right? Can't you show some consideration in the end? I was a good husband who supported you, after all. With a smirk, I responded to John's attitude. All right. Then I'll expect you to listen to everything I have to say. But never bother me with pathetic apologies or pleas for help instead, okay? Ha, ha, as if I'd ever say something that lame. All right, deal. Thus, I proceeded with the divorce from John, securing a significant amount for child support among other things, closing the chapter on our marriage. But the real drama was just beginning. What's going on? She found out about the affair. Sometime after the divorce, John called me in agony. I realized I had forgotten to block his number. As I pondered this oversight, John began to vent his frustrations. This is the worst. The president of the client company insists on apologizing to you and is furious with me. You broke the promise not to tell her, so give me back the money now. While listening to John complaining, I couldn't help but wonder why I ever married such a person. Then, I decided to reveal a truth that John hadn't even considered. You know I'm a car enthusiast, right? And the president of the company you mentioned, he runs an auto parts manufacturing company, doesn't he? Actually, I've been a customer of his for a while. I took the car you wrecked for repairs there. Then, by chance, his daughter, your mistress, saw the car and screamed, exposing everything. See? I didn't break any promise. Realizing what I meant, John groaned. The woman he was having an affair with was working hard as an apprentice auto mechanic at her father's company. It was only natural for her to be shocked when a stranger brought in the car her boyfriend had crashed for repairs. When asked, I simply stated the truth. My ex-husband crashed into a guardrail, causing a solo accident. Since the car is in my name, I brought it in for repairs. The mistress pieced everything together and explained the situation to her father, leading to John's company finding out about the incident. Her father was furious, questioning what kind of upbringing John had to cheat with his daughter while being married. So, I lose everything? Kicked out of my home, no money. Disowned by my dad, and all I have is my burdensome mom. And now, I'll lose my job too? His complaints were his own doing. If you had lived properly, this wouldn't have happened. Your actions are to blame. Take care, and don't contact me ever again. I made my feelings clear and hung up, ensuring to block John's number this time for good. Later, when my car was fixed, I reluctantly learned about John's fate. As expected, he was fired from his company. Not only did his misconduct contribute, but it was also revealed that he had been embezzling company funds. Though offered a demotion if he returned the stolen money, John, burdened with a significant debt from paying me, had no such means. So, he was dismissed without much ado. His mother remained dependent on him. At their age, without money or work, they had no choice but to live together in a cramped one-room apartment, paying a mere $200 in rent. The divorce between his parents went through without asset division or compensation, as per his father's offer, which his mother accepted. Yet, their life became one of extreme poverty. Tired of scrimping on bread and vegetables, John's mother ordered expensive food delivery, leading to a police-involved dispute. Eventually, she started working part-time at a store. Despite the unfortunate circumstances, no one sympathized with her due to her own actions leading to this outcome. As for me, life continued as usual post-divorce. I had been covering most of the living expenses originally, and Tiffany and I continued living in our home, so there hasn't been any change in our living environment so far. Interestingly, perhaps because she was freed from John, who was always nagging about her grades, Tiffany's marks have improved a bit, ironically. Especially by the time she reached middle school, her grades in art were so good that she expressed a desire to pursue a path in the arts. As a parent, my role is simply to respect my child's choices. Even if it might be a thorny path, as long as it doesn't lead her astray from a good life, I'm prepared to let her pursue her interests to her heart's content. Look, I won first place in the contest again. Impressive. You really have a talent for art. Even after the divorce, my former father-in-law, now living in a facility, keeps in touch through Tiffany. Though technically no longer related, we maintain our bond, grateful for his trust in me over his own son and wife. I hope he continues to live a long and fulfilling life.
Sarah is useless even in the kitchen. She can't even serve a decent meal at home. Everyone's cold gazes suddenly turned towards me. Seeing me like this, Paul seemed to get even more carried away and started to boast loudly. My wife's cooking is terrible, huh? What? Have you ever eaten my cooking? Aren't you always eating at your mistress' place? What? I loudly denounced Paul's infidelity. It's not a lie. I have proof right here. I pointed to the documents held by my father-in-law. My name is Sarah Reed, 35 years old. I have always been intimidated by the assertiveness that is often characteristic of men, and as a result, I have had very few romantic relationships and virtually no experience dating men. As I reached the age commonly referred to as in your 40s, my parents became concerned and started to suggest arranged marriages. Initially, I refused, but with few opportunities to meet men and pressure from my parents, I felt a rush to marry and went on several arranged dates. One of these was with Paul. Paul was a kind, serious man who worked elite employee at a top company. He was big both in height and build, but surprisingly, he didn't have an intimidating presence. And I wasn't scared of him. The talks about marriage progressed smoothly, and I even met Paul's parents. Paul's family ran a chess class and were masters of a famous school. Paul's father was a grandmaster of chess, a quiet and strict man. He always wore a suit, and I naturally straightened my posture when I met him. On the other hand, his mother was gentle, with a soft demeanor, and her smile would create dimples. Paul and I decided to get married. My parents were thrilled, saying I was marrying into a wealthy family. The condition for the marriage was that I would become a housewife, so I resigned from my clerical job at an electronics manufacturer. Even then, my colleagues teased me endlessly about marrying into wealth. Looking back, that was probably the peak of my happiness. Paul said, "I'm busy with work now and might not be able to come home often, but please bear with it for a while." Paul wanted to achieve certain results in his current job before quitting to help with the family business. I thought it was good to be committed to one's work, so I supported him. Years into the marriage, Paul hardly ever came home. I knew he wouldn't be able to come home often, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. I was alone in the living room of our apartment, waiting for Paul. This apartment was provided by Paul's parents when we got married. "He's not coming home again today." I've only managed to cook for Paul a few times. Not only does Paul hardly ever come home, but since we got married, it's been rare for him to come home normally. He often goes on business trips, leaving the house empty for days at a time. Dinner is almost always out, and it's normal for Paul to come home late. He leaves early in the morning, despite coming home late. I was really worried whether Paul was getting enough sleep or eating nutritious food. He would leave the house without eating breakfast. I once called Paul in the morning and asked him why he wouldn't eat at home. "Paul, I wish you would eat properly." Paul, without even looking at me, was tying his tie. "It's okay. I'm just really busy with work right now. Don't worry about it." With that, Paul would leave the house immediately. Even on holidays, Paul works from early in the morning until late at night, regardless of whether it's a Saturday, Sunday, or a public holiday. He's often away on business trips too. In the beginning, I thought maybe Paul was trying to be considerate by not being home too much. Or perhaps he was embarrassed, and I found that thought somewhat endearing. As this situation of him not being home continued, it felt like I was living alone. Paul's belongings are minimal, just the bare necessities. Naturally, we hardly ever talk, so I don't know anything about his hobbies, what foods he likes or dislikes. I wondered if it was my fault. I've talked to my parents about it, but they said it's good for a man to be busy with work, and they didn't take my concerns seriously. My few friends think it's better for a husband to be out earning money and not being at home too much. They even said they were envious, not taking my worries too hard. Paul handles the finances, but he does give me a proper allowance for our living expenses every month, so I don't have any financial worries. This lack of financial worries, in turn, makes me anxious. I can't help but blame myself, wondering if I've done something to make Paul dislike me. I've started to question if there's something lacking in me as a wife. I meticulously take care of cleaning and have been studying cooking to prepare delicious meals. On the rare occasions when Paul sees my anxious face, he tries to dispel my worries. "Sarah, you're doing just fine." I try to convince myself that this is just another form of marriage, but I was scolded by my father-in-law the other day. I received a call from him at the end of the year, which was unusual. As I picked up, he shouted so loudly that I dropped the phone. "Sarah, what kind of nerve do you have?" "Huh? Did something happen?" "Don't play dumb. Why haven't you attended the family gatherings? And it's been over a year." I was shocked because I hadn't heard about these family gatherings before. I had discussed with Paul about greeting for Christmas, and he had told me that we don't gather because his chess students come for greetings. He also said that the family doesn't gather because it gets too chaotic with so many people. Normally, only Paul goes back home with Christmas greetings. If you're not going to attend this year either, shouldn't you at least apologize for not being able to join? His stern voice made me freeze. I had been staying home, thinking it was usual for Paul to visit his parents alone during the Christmas. I had been careful with Christmas cards and greetings, thinking I was being respectful. I had suggested to Paul that we should at least make a phone call, but he said it was incredibly busy during the year-end and Christmas, and I thought that might be expected in the family. I was afraid of meeting my strict father-in-law, not without reason. According to him, the family gathers on December 24th for a Christmas meeting, and the students come for greetings from December 25th. All I could do was apologize profusely over the phone. After his harsh words, he hung up. After the call, my mind was filled with questions. What did Paul mean by "Sarah doesn't need to come"? Why did he lie about the family gatherings not happening? Was he trying to keep me from attending that much? That night, Just as the day changed, Paul came home. I felt it was now or never, so I asked him about the Christmas gathering. I received a phone call from your father today. He was angry that I didn't attend the Christmas gathering. Paul sighed and replied reluctantly, Going to such a large gathering can be daunting. Plus, many wives dislike visiting their husbands' family homes. That's why I thought I was being considerate. I was astounded by Paul's misguided attempt at consideration. Indeed, many people dislike visiting their spouse's family home. My friends complain about not wanting to go, but never going at all is surely unreasonable. Despite Paul's reluctance, I decided to insist on attending the gathering. The Reed family's Christmas gathering was a grand affair. Many relatives gathered, exchanging greetings. Finally, you've shown your face. It's natural for family members to attend such events. His words were stern. Even when I mentioned that Paul had told me there were no family gatherings, my father-in-law remained furious. You've been avoiding us because you didn't want to see us, right? His anger was so intense that I couldn't find a way to respond and I gave up on rebutting. The relatives all looked at me with disdain. I thought it was inevitable. I decided to endure it. What I couldn't stand, though, was that Paul did nothing to help. Instead, he just silently drank his alcohol. As everyone drank more, they started coming up to me to complain. Paul has always said he's never seen you do any housework. In my heart, I whispered, It's because Paul hardly ever comes home. You rarely cook, and when you do, it's not tasty, so he ends up eating out all the time. The words from the relatives were all unfamiliar to me. What had Paul been telling them? I couldn't understand why he was disparaging me. I'm sorry, I'll be more careful from now on. Overwhelmed by their harsh words, all I could do was stiffen up and apologize. I helped in the kitchen and served drinks, feeling like I was sitting on pins and needles. After barely getting through the gathering and the greetings from the students, I returned home exhausted. Paul said he was going to work from his parents' home and, like on the way there, we went our separate ways on the way back. Looking back, it was all so strange. Why had Paul said there was no family gathering? And why was he spreading rumors that I was a bad wife who didn't do housework? Was there a connection to him not coming home? I couldn't stop thinking about it once I started. Fortunately, I had plenty of time. I decided to follow Paul's movements, like the detectives say in TV dramas, a stalk out. I followed Paul one morning as he left her house in a hurry. I knew where his office was, so it was easy to tell him there. I felt a bit excited, like a detective, which was more fulfilling than spending the day doing nothing at home. I killed time in cafes and restaurants near his office and followed Paul when he went out. He returned to the office in the evening without doing anything suspicious. Watching from a cafe with a view of his office, I saw Paul leave around 7 p.m. Maybe he finished work early today. If he went straight home, he'd realize I was out. I hurried back home. I managed to get home before Paul and prepare dinner, waiting for him. However, Paul didn't return until after midnight. Feeling that something was amiss, I decided to conduct a follow-up the next day. Paul's actions from morning to evening were the same. Go to the office, leave for a bit, and return in the evening. The issue was what happened afterward. Watching from a different restaurant, I saw Paul leave the office around 6 p.m. Today, I followed him directly. Instead of heading to the station to go home, he started walking in a different direction. I hesitated for a moment. Paul walked toward a downtown area filled with hotels. I decided to follow him, but lost sight of him. As I was looking around, Paul suddenly appeared in front of me. Both of us were surprised, staring at each other. Paul was the first to speak. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I couldn't come up with a good excuse and ended up mumbling. "What are you doing in a place like this during the day?" I was shocked. Paul was the suspicious one. Yet, I was being treated as if I was doing something wrong. "Anyway, go home. We'll talk after that." Embarrassed to be scolded by Paul in such a pace, I hurried home. As soon as Paul came home late at night, he confronted me with something outrageous. "So, you've been idling at home and now you're following your husband around? Why should I have to support someone like that?" I tried to protest quietly. "I do take care of the house." "Don't say you're doing housework just because you clean a little. From now on, manage with $100 for living expenses." I was speechless. How am I supposed to live on $100? "The utility bills are deducted from my account. Besides, you won't have to spend on my food." Paul smirked maliciously. "Then at least let me work. Let me get a part-time job." Paul looked down on me, his lips twisted. "No, work full-time like me, and don't slack on the housework." Despite my objections, Paul's determination was unyielding. Eventually, I had to comply and return to my previous job at the electrical manufacturer. I ended up having to do all the housework while working. My life became incredibly busy overnight. I couldn't play detective anymore, caught up in the daily grind of work and chores. Since then, Paul has become like a different person, constantly finding fault with me and complaining about the housework. In the short moments we saw each other in the morning, he would complain, "The windows are dirty. There is a dust in the entrance. The shirts aren't ironed properly," and then leave for work. I have to do all these chores at night since I work during the day. At the end of the year approached and the Christmas gathering drew near. Paul, as usual, told me not to attend. "You stay at home. You don't need to come to the gathering." I stayed silent, thinking arguing was futile. As Paul left, he threw a parting shot. "I can't show someone like you to my relatives. It would be embarrassing." I was shocked by his harsh words. How could Paul say such things? I work from nothing till night and handle all the housework on top of that. Anyway, I decided to attend the Christmas gathering without telling Paul. And then, I had to make Paul's true nature known to my father-in-law and mother-in-law. I clutched the thick envelope that had arrived earlier tightly. On the day of the Christmas gathering, I arrived at the Reed family home to attend. I took a deep breath and opened the front door. Seeing me suddenly appear at the Christmas gathering, Paul was surprised, but due to being in front of everyone, he just glared at me without saying anything. The relatives' gazes were as cold as ever, whispering accusation against me. It was clear they had been deceived by my husband. I didn't let it bother me. Enduring their cold stares, I stood in the kitchen, preparing food and drinks. After a while, as the alcohol began to affect him, Paul started loudly criticizing me. "Sarah is useless even if she's in the kitchen. She never cooked a decent meal at home." All the cold gazes suddenly turned towards me. Seeing me in such a state, Paul, perhaps feeling encouraged, began to boast loudly. "My wife's cooking is terrible." My father-in-law's stern gaze was directed at me. "What on earth is going on? What are you doing? Maybe you're not suitable to be Paul's wife." As my father-in-law raised his voice, all the relatives' gazes suddenly focused on me. Just as it seemed my father-in-law was about to start lecturing, I stood up in front of Paul and began to retort. Huh? Have you ever eaten my cooking? Isn't it always at your mistress' place? What? My father-in-law was taken aback, his mouth half open. What are you starting to say? While everyone was stunned, Paul began to make excuses in a flattered manner. Come on, Sarah. Just because you're spoken ill of, why would you tell such lies? Turning back to his father, Paul began to make excuses. Dad, I didn't have a mistress. That must be the case. My father-in-law wanted to believe Paul. He nodded more to Paul's words than to mine. Thinking he had gained his father's trust, Paul began to retort with confidence. Stop saying ridiculous things. You are really out of your mind. It wasn't just a bluff when I said Paul had a mistress. I took an envelope out of my bag and showed the documents inside to my father-in-law and the others. Paul continued to harshly criticize me without concern. Apologize right now, then I'll forgive you for lying. The relatives probably believed Paul didn't have a mistress and looked at me with harsh gazes. My father-in-law and mother-in-law were earnestly reading the documents. The documents I handed over were the result of an investigation into Paul's affair. Since Paul's actions were clearly suspicious, I had a detective agency take over the investigation thoroughly. The results from the detective agency were damning. Paul was definitely cheating. The reason Paul didn't come home was that he was meeting his mistress. He mostly spent his time at his mistress' house and sometimes used hotels, as reported. Paul was always eating at his mistress' place. While I managed our living expenses with just $100, worked full-time and took care of the old household chores, Paul was cozying up with his mistress. When I encountered Paul in the hotel district, he was about to have a secret meeting with his mistress in a hotel. I loudly accused Paul of his affair. It's not a lie. Here's the evidence. I pointed to the document held by my father-in-law. The apartment Paul entered isn't ours. Murmurs of doubt rose from the relatives. Hey, Paul, is this true? What's going on? Is this made up? My father-in-law and mother-in-law were scrutinizing the documents as if trying to bore holes through them. Paul, is this true? Sweating profusely, Paul desperately denied it. No, that's not it. There's no way I have a mistress. What my father-in-law and mother-in-law were engrossed in were the photos. Photos of Paul holding hands with an unknown woman entering an unfamiliar apartment. Photos of them selecting jewelry together in the jewelry store. Photos of them drinking wine in a stylish restaurant. Photos of them picking out groceries in the supermarket. In all of them, Paul's carefree smile was captured. I pressed Paul relentlessly. Paul, you said you were busy with overtime every day, right? Paul's face turned red, and he fell silent. My anger made me speak rapidly. Not wanting to meet with relatives, saying my cooking isn't good. Why did you tell such lies? I didn't tell any lies. Even at this point, Paul was trying to feign ignorance. This attitude deeply disappointed me. Our exchange silenced everyone. Then my mother-in-law's loud voice filled the room. Paul, what are you doing? Paul was taken aback by his mother's sudden outburst. No, that's not it. My mother-in-law's usually gentle face was gone, replaced by a furious expression that even scared me, who wasn't being scolded. What's different? Are you saying all of this is fabricated? She spoke calmly now, but this calmness was somehow even more intimidating. No one in the family could speak under her intense presence. So, the story about Sarah was a lie you made up. Now explain yourself properly. Whispers such as, I've never seen her so angry. She's always smiling, but she's the scariest when mad, spread among the relatives. Seemingly resigned, Paul sat on the floor, made himself small, and began to speak in a quiet voice. That woman was someone I dated before we were married, whom I met at a nightclub in New York City. The relatives began to murmur. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law stared at Paul with stern faces. This family is strict, so marrying a woman from a nightclub would never be accepted. Was Paul crying? Dots of moisture spotted on the floor. So I thought just marry someone suitable on paper and I could live at her place. And that someone suitable was me. Paul apologized. I'm sorry, you said you weren't interested in marriage, and I thought as long as I provided money, everything would be fine. Then a question popped into my head. Then why did you badmouth me to your parents? Without those bad words, I wouldn't have been so suspicious. I wanted her to be my real wife. I couldn't stand the idea of living with someone like Sarah, whom I don't even like. I wanted to divorce somehow. Do you realize how selfish you're being? Paul seemed to shrink even more. I'm sorry. I've always been told I'm not an adult until I'm married, so I thought I had to get married at least. And once divorced, I thought they wouldn't bother me about getting married again. Paul had gambled that once divorced, his parents wouldn't meddle in his affairs, allowing him to focus on his relationship with his mistress. He needed a pretext for divorce, making it look like I was at fault. That's why he badmouthed me to tarnish my reputation. Limiting my living expenses to $100 was to prevent me from investigating his cheating. With only that much money and working full-time, I wouldn't have the time or resources to probe further. He hadn't anticipated I would use the detective agency. His oversight led to his moment, with Paul apologizing on his knees before the family. I told you infidelity is the worst. You betrayed Sarah, who has been so devoted. Veins throbbed on her forehead, her anger nowhere near subsiding. Paul remained with his forehead to the floor, tears and snot streaming down his face. Paul, you are a disgrace to our family. We disown you. The gathered relatives gasped. Her word was likely final. My father-in-law nodded in agreement. Paul had lost his place in this family, exposed for his infidelity and lies, and now, disowned by his own mother, Paul staggered to his feet, wiped his tears, and left the room without a word. After Paul left, my mother-in-law came over to me and apologized while holding my hand. Sarah, I'm so sorry for what Paul has done. He's been terrible. My father-in-law also apologized. We are truly sorry. You should divorce him. It's okay. My mother-in-law continued to hold my hand with tears in her voice. To think that Paul was such a person, we were completely deceived by him. I'm so sorry for scolding you so harshly over things that weren't true. I had thought my father-in-law was always angry and stubborn, but he was quick to admit his mistake and apologize, showing his good nature. It was clear that this family was held together thanks to my mother-in-law. It was puzzling how Paul, with such good parents, could become so mean-spirited and disdainful towards others. I reconciled with my in-laws, and sooner after, my divorce from Paul was finalized. The divorce was, ironically, what Paul had wanted. After being disowned by his family due to his affair, Paul, no longer having the backing of a prestigious family, was sidetracked from his career path and relegated to being a marginal employee. With his income significantly reduced, Paul was eventually dumped by his mistress, who had grown tired of him. I learned about these developments from Paul's mother. I received compensation from both Paul and his mistress. Especially from the Reed family, I received an amount well above the going rate. I presumed this included hush money. With the financial windfall, I've been able to afford luxuries like several overseas trips a year. The apartment prepared for me as a new home is mine to use as I please until I decide otherwise. Since Paul was hardly ever there, there's no reminder of him, and I live quite comfortably. Returning to work was the one good thing that came out of Paul's mess. Thanks to being coerced back into employment by Paul, I now have an income and don't foresee any financial troubles in my future. I occasionally keep in touch with my in-laws. They invite me to the Christmas gatherings, but I always decline.
I'll leave the kid to you. Have fun with that.
While wondering what he meant, Justin blurted out something outrageous. It seems he's currently living with his affair partner, taking advantage of the fact that we're separated. He expressed his desire to divorce me and marry his affair partner, especially after my mother's death. Indeed, since separation is treated similarly to divorce, I've heard it's difficult to claim compensation for infidelity after separation. I didn't care anymore and hung up the phone. 3 days later, I found 23 missed calls from Justin on my smartphone. But assuming he called only for his convenience, I didn't respond and just blocked his calls. But Justin was persistent. He even started sending messages through social media, which I usually don't use. That's when I decided to fight back against Justin. Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you how. There's no need for sympathy for Justin, who not only missed my mother's funeral but also planned to elope due to his affair. I decided to pay him back more than double for everything he's done to me. My name is Courtney, a 46-year-old part-time housewife. My family consists of my husband Justin, who is a year older than me, and my 16-year-old daughter Tracy, a freshman in high school. We lived in a small apartment in a rural area. I got married when I was 23, but after discovering I was infertile, we went through 5 years of fertility treatments before finally having our long-awaited daughter, Tracy. However, I struggled with the challenges of first-time parenting. Eventually, I lost my mental capacity and quit my job to become a temporary full-time housewife. Because of societal expectations, I was always the one called when Tracy got sick, accompanying her to the hospital. This led to me quitting my job. I didn't hate taking care of Tracy, but after being indirectly asked to resign by my boss, I couldn't take it anymore and left. Eventually, I felt depressed staying at home all the time, so I started working a part-time job while sending Tracy to daycare. Justin and I couldn't forget the hardships of 5 years of fertility treatment and decided that having just Tracy was enough. I realized something was wrong with Justin around the time Tracy was in the upper grades of elementary school. Tracy was a good student, and I desperately wanted her to take the entrance exams for private middle schools. We were positive about the idea and even attended open campuses together to decide on a school. Justin earned enough to support us, even with me being a full-time housewife. For Tracy's tuition fee, I was willing to use my savings, which I had before I got married, and untouched earnings from my part-time job. However, Justin was adamant against it, refusing to allow Tracy to take the exams.
What's the point of going to private middle schools? Just send her to a regular public middle school. That's enough for Tracy. Private middle schools are for daughters of company CEOs or something, right?
No matter how I tried to convince him, Justin stubbornly refused. Finally, losing my patience, I said to Tracy, "You can take the exam if you want. I want to support what you want to do. Don't worry about anything, just focus on your studies." However, Tracy shook her head, looking guilty. She probably hated seeing us argue over her future. That was when I realized I shouldn't be showing our arguments to our child. For Tracy's sake, I tried to avoid intense arguments with Justin and became extremely cautious. This marked the beginning of my life walking on eggshells around Justin. But the more I tried to be careful, the more sensitive I became, leading to even minor things escalating into arguments.
You know, I've been meaning to say this for a while. Isn't this simmered dish too strong? I hate this kind of seasoning.
Justin suddenly confessed that he never liked my cooking. It seemed like the argument over the exams had broken the dam. From there, he became indifferent to me, bluntly criticizing everything I did. He complained about things like not liking the sauces I make or hating the tomatoes I always put in his lunchbox. His constant complaints at the dinner table made me feel terrible. Reluctantly, I stopped adding tomatoes and carrots, which he also said he hated. Then he said,
"Your lunchboxes lack color and make me lose my appetite. I don't want them anymore,"
and threw them away. Fed up with his constant complaints, I finally snapped. "Then eat out if you're going to complain so much. If that's how it is, I will never make your lunch again." After that, I stopped making Justin's lunches altogether. And then came the next turning point. It was when Tracy, attending a public middle school, was about to take her high school entrance exams. While Tracy was attending middle school, she joined an archery club outside of school, which was her only real passion, and she was qualified for the national competition. She was also academically gifted and skilled at playing the piano, a hobby I encouraged her to pursue. She always looked forward to her weekly piano lessons. Tracy was adept at just about everything and was serious by nature, even serving as the vice president of the student council at her school. Regretting having to make her give up on middle school exams, I was determined to support her choice of high school. When I asked about her preferred high school, she mentioned a famous private school in Boston.
"I was hesitant to say it, but I really want to go here. It's also a prestigious school for archery, and I'll do my best."
I nodded in agreement with Tracy's words. She had become considerate of her father, Justin, always putting her own desires last. Even when she wanted books or clothes, she'd say, "It's okay," when I offered to buy them, and she looked guilty when receiving them as birthday gifts. I felt helpless as a mother, making my child feel this way. That's why I wanted to fulfill the dream Tracy bravely shared. I assured her that it was okay, as we had my savings and her education insurance. However, I had to inform Justin about Tracy's educational aspirations. As expected, he flatly refused.
"A private high school in Boston? It's too far from here. That means she'll have to live in a dorm or an apartment. I won't allow it. It's a waste of money."
I felt outraged by his words. To call the tuition fees for our only daughter a waste was unthinkable. I couldn't help but argue back. "You even complained about her middle school exams, but why do you always say such things? It's for Tracy, our only daughter. Don't you have the slightest desire to let her do what she wants?" But my words didn't seem to affect Justin at all. He let out a theatrical sigh and shouted,
No way. Private school and living alone as a high school student are just a waste of money. If she doesn't go to a local public high school, I won't provide for you two anymore."
At that point, I snapped and said, "Fine, we'll do just that. But in return, let us do what we want without you complaining about it." I reassured Tracy, "I'll handle it, so just take the exams for the high school you want to attend. You don't need to compromise this time, okay? You should do what you really want." However, Tracy looked worried and hesitated, saying,
"But..."
Still, after reassuring her many times and through my persuasion, she seemed to have made up her mind. The following spring, Tracy successfully passed the entrance exam for her first choice high school.
"Mom, I did it!"
She reported back to me with a big smile upon returning from school. No parent could be anything but happy to see their child succeed in their first choice high school exam. I cooked her favorite dishes and praised Tracy a lot. "You've worked hard through tough times." However, Justin, who didn't even celebrate this achievement, says something terrible.
"As promised, you take care of Tracy and yourself from now on. I won't put any more money into this house."
He spoke coldly and truly stopped contributing to the household expenses. Tracy was about to enter the high school dormitory. For me, it was a turning point in parenting, and I had already decided to work full-time at a hospital, anticipating no financial difficulties. So Justin's attitude didn't matter to me anymore. Months have passed since Tracy started high school and adapted to her new life. I was relieved to hear she was doing well. I recently started a new job, working from morning to night. I'm learning gradually with the support of my colleagues, and I'm also studying for a qualification. My life now, where I don't have to be involved with Justin, is definitely easier. Justin and I are still not divorced, but we've been separated for several months, with him living in a different apartment. After settling into the new life, I realized I could manage without Justin and planned to proceed with a divorce as soon as everything was ready. I thought Justin wouldn't want to continue the separation either. Wanting to end this separation in one way or another, I prepared the divorce agreement. But then I received devastating news. My mother had passed away. When my father informed me, I was in shock. My mother had always been frail, frequently hospitalized since my childhood. I remembered praying with my father for her to get better. I knew she had been battling cancer for a year and understood her time was limited. Still, accepting the news of her passing was hard. My father, having lost his longtime companion, was in despair. He didn't seem to have the energy to prepare for her funeral, so I helped him prepare for her memorial service and her funeral. As an only child, there was no one else suitable. My father weakly smiled at me and said,
"Thank you for helping."
We hadn't told anyone about our separation, and my father, of course, hadn't mentioned it to others, so I thought it best to ask Justin to attend the funeral. I quickly sent him a message about my mother's passing and the funeral details, but unsurprisingly, there was no reply. Justin didn't show up on the day of the funeral, and Tracy, who had returned home for this reason, muttered softly, "Dad's the worst." Even though my father seemed so devoid of energy, he was angry, saying that his wife and daughter were being ridiculed. I had my own issues with Justin, but now was not the time for that. Both of you, I feel the same, but do you really want to send her off feeling angry like that? Mom always said that having a smile is the best, didn't she? My words reminded them of how my mother used to say that with a smile. They regained their composure, and we managed to see my mother off peacefully. That night, I thought Justin was calling back, but instead he blurted out something completely insensitive.
"I'll leave the kid to you. Have fun with that." Huh.
I wondered what he was talking about. As I stayed silent, Justin, unasked, started to speak loudly.
"To put it simply, I'm thinking of eloping with my girlfriend. She's younger and more charming than you."
Apparently, he was living with his mistress, taking advantage of our separation, and now wanted to divorce me and marry his mistress, especially after my mother's death. Indeed, separation is often treated like divorce, so I had heard that claiming compensation for infidelity after separation is difficult, but to me, none of that mattered anymore. I just said, "Oh, really? Then do as you like," and hung up the phone. 3 days later, I found 23 missed calls from Justin on my smartphone. Assuming they were not about anything good, I didn't respond and simply blocked his calls. Realizing that I wasn't going to answer the phone, Justin sent an apology through his social media. I sighed and made a decision. Fine, if that's what you want, I'll show you hell. Not only did he not attend my mother's funeral, but he also chose that time to abandon Tracy and me. Furthermore, he had the audacity to elope with his mistress. There's no need for pity for someone like Justin. I decided to pay him back more than double for everything he's done to us. I immediately sent a message saying, "Let's meet tomorrow." The next day, I waited for Justin at the cafe where we agreed to meet. A few minutes later, Justin arrived in a hurry. His face was pale, and he was visibly shaken. I had nothing to say to him, so I just stared at his face, perhaps glaring at him unconsciously. Used to me not being so overly confrontational, Justin nervously started speaking.
"I'm really sorry I couldn't attend your mother's funeral, but there's a reason. The timing was bad."
As he explained, someone in Justin's family had fallen ill and their situation was critical. Surgery could save them, but without it, they weren't sure if his family member would make it or not. So what? If surgery is the only option, just do it. What does that have to do with me? Then Justin, with a pained expression, answered,
It's a complicated surgical procedure that ordinary hospitals can't perform. It's going to be expensive and won't be covered by insurance.
According to Justin, the surgery required advanced medical techniques and would be entirely from his family's savings. His family had decided to pool money for it, and Justin needed to contribute about $10,000. I was astounded by his audacity. It's not my mother-in-law or father-in-law, but some relative I've never even met, right? When I coldly stated that, Justin's face turned red with anger.
Don't talk so coldly. You just lost your mother, so you should understand how I feel, right?
I understood what he was going through, but it was a completely different matter. First of all, the timing is suspicious. And is it really a disease that requires advanced medical intervention? What's the diagnosis? How much will the surgery cost in total? I bombarded him with questions, and Justin stumbled over his words and fell silent. My family, being well-known landowners in the area, had substantial savings, which Justin might not have known in detail, but he was aware that my family was wealthy. I suspected he was after the inheritance. Even if he genuinely needed a large sum of money for a medical emergency, I couldn't trust Justin based on his past behavior. I sighed dramatically and then said this. What you and I need to do is get a divorce and then discuss custody and division of property. That's it. Then Justin said,
Wait, please. I won't ever do anything to make you sad again. Please, just reconsider.
He cried out desperately, trying to convince me. His face was contorted, clearly trying to figure out how to turn the situation around. I spoke again, more firmly. I can't have any hope for a future with you anymore. If you really feel sorry, please, let's just get a divorce. Saying that, I stood up, paid only for my coffee, and left the place. That night, unbelievably, Justin showed up at my house.
Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door.
When Justin left our home, he said he would never return and left his keys, so it was natural that he couldn't get in. However, at that time, I was in the bathroom and didn't notice Justin's arrival. It seemed that Tracy had answered the door instead, and as I noticed something was amiss and headed to the entrance, I saw them. Tracy was standing tall, looking down at Justin, who was begging on his knees. What's going on? Justin, what are you doing here? As I asked, Justin raised his face, begging for forgiveness.
Please, I'm begging you like this. Can you lend me $10,000 as an advance on the property division?
I thought he had come to apologize, but as usual, he was only asking for money. In the end, to Justin, Tracy and I must have been inconsequential. I felt a surge of anger, but managed to restrain myself. I really wanted to shout and drive him away, but I realized running away from the situation wasn't the right choice. For Tracy's sake, I needed to resolve this separation soon. After taking a deep breath to calm myself, I said to Justin, I already told you that's not our concern anymore. We took care of my mother's funeral with my relatives, and you had nothing to do with it, so I don't see why I should take care of a relative of yours that I've never even met. Justin didn't know what to say, unable to respond. He had never involved himself with my family's hospitalizations or funerals, yet now when he's in trouble, he wants my help. He's being very selfish. Then, realizing that pleading to me was futile, Justin turned to Tracy and clung to her.
Tracy, please talk to your mom. To you, a relative of your father's isn't irrelevant, right? Come on, help me out. You're kind-hearted. You'd feel bad knowing a relative is sick, won't you?
Usually, Justin hardly spoke, and when he did, it was mostly sarcasm, but at times like this, he became quite talkative. Moreover, he was now clinging to the daughter he had planned to abandon for his mistress, refusing even to pay for her tuition fees. It gave me a headache. I had endured a lot for Tracy's sake, but perhaps it would have been better to have divorced Justin from the start and lived just with her. But regretting it now was too late. I wondered what Tracy thought. Maybe she would be moved by her father's words and try to persuade me. I felt embarrassed for even thinking that for a moment, as Tracy, with a resolute expression, retorted, Who the hell are you? Both Justin and I were stunned by her response. She denied his existence outright, not with rejection or words of comfort. Watching Tracy's composed face, I felt a sense of relief. Moved by the sight of my daughter grown so strong, Tracy continued without even looking at Justin.
Didn't you tell Mom to deal with the kid? You basically gave up your parental rights. You're divorcing Mom to be with your mistress, right?
It appeared Tracy had overheard our phone conversation. I had tried to be discreet, but Tracy must have had her own thoughts about her father not attending the funeral. To Tracy, Justin, who was being unfaithful and saying that she was unnecessary, was no longer a father but a stranger. This left Justin visibly shaken, unable to move. Tracy, after letting out a heavy sigh, glared fiercely at him.
You've always interfered with my future, and now you play the father card only when it suits you? To me, Mom was the only one who took care of me. I don't care about someone who didn't even come to my beloved grandma's funeral.
Justin remained motionless for a while, but eventually seemed to comprehend Tracy's words. He stood up, red-faced, glaring at Tracy like a demon, and said,
You ungrateful child. Do you know how much I've sacrificed for you? If you're going to say that, then repay all the tuition I paid up until middle school.
His behavior was immature. To think a parent would demand tuition repayment from their child for fulfilling their duty. It disgusted me that he was my husband. Justin, with an eager look, approached us. Tracy, possibly feeling scared, stepped back a step and then another. However, at that moment, we heard police sirens and a patrol car stopped in front of our apartment. Justin stopped and slowly turned around. There stood our neighbors, looking more terrifying than Justin. I hadn't noticed due to the commotion, but I had left the door open. Our apartment has thin walls, and it was evening when many people were home. It seemed the neighbors had heard the noise and called the police. Realizing the police were here for him, Justin suddenly became flustered, his previous bravado gone. The police officer approached us first and asked about what had happened. The neighbors had reported Justin as a suspicious person. My relationship with the neighbors was always good. When I mentioned my mother's funeral, they even asked to attend to offer their respects. Naturally, they had asked about Justin's absence, and I had answered honestly. I remembered how the neighbors had unanimously condemned Justin as the worst upon hearing my story, knowing that they hadn't seen him around lately. Despite all that had happened, when Justin suddenly returned and caused a commotion at the front door, the neighbors didn't hesitate to call the police. Justin had always said that neighborhood relations were unnecessary, but in that moment I was grateful for the good relationship I have maintained with our neighbors. The police, while not intervening in civil matters, did not irresponsibly leave the scene unattended. Justin desperately tried to clear up the misunderstanding, saying,
No, you've got it all wrong. I'm the head of this household. What's wrong with returning to my own home where my wife and daughter are? This is just a minor domestic dispute. Nothing that requires the police's involvement.
His clear denial in front of the onlookers sparked a chorus of boos. The police officer calmed the crowd and then asked me if what Justin said was true. I answered honestly. I'm embarrassed to say this, but my husband and I are currently separated. He seems to have someone else already, and we were ready to divorce any day. I've even written the divorce papers. Believing my story, the police officer urged Justin to return to his current residence. The neighbors who had been watching from a distance also seemed to radiate an aura of, go back to where you came from. Despite looking like he wanted to say more, Justin remained at the scene, so I said to him, this isn't solving anything. Besides, when we separated, the house lease was transferred to my name, and I've been paying the rent, so don't just barge in here like you own the place. Justin seemed to have no response to that and fell silent again. Tracy then joined in, saying to the officer,
Sir, this man is scary.
That seemed to be the last straw for the police, who judged it necessary to protect Tracy, a minor. The officer said sternly to Justin,
It's time for you to leave.
Realizing the futility of resisting any further, Justin dejectedly left. 2 weeks had passed since Justin's visit. I consulted with a lawyer about the incident and decided to proceed with the divorce, seeking legal assistance. Considering Justin's behavior, I felt it would be difficult to have a reasonable discussion with him. The lawyer agreed, so I knew I had made the right choice. Finally, the day came when I had to speak with Justin again. He appeared dejected, but I unhesitatingly handed him the documents without saying a word. Justin, looking puzzled, read through them and was visibly shocked by what he saw.
What? What is this? How did you find out?
The documents detailed a claim for compensation against Justin and his mistress for infidelity. Justin's previous attitude had all been a blatant lie. Though he did have an affair, he had been influenced by the other woman to put on an act. This is what his mistress said to him.
Your wife will inherit something now that her mother has passed away. If you shake things up a bit, you can get some money. Faced with a large sum, she'll probably want to settle with cash. Let's put on a show and try to get, say, about $10,000 for our marriage.
The story about a family member needing advanced medical treatment and a large sum of money was a complete lie. It was a fabricated scenario to steal money from me. At that time, I just couldn't shake off my feeling of unease. After the funeral, Justin had called, clearly intending to break up, but then he suddenly turned weak and came begging. I had suspected something was behind his change of behavior. The timing was too perfect. Trusting my intuition, I had secretly hired a detective right after Justin's call to investigate his affairs. Once he openly admitted to the affair, Justin didn't bother to hide the evidence, making the collection of proof straightforward. Getting bolder after revealing the affair, he even celebrated his 5th year of relationship with his mistress, caught on camera saying,
"Let's toast to our 5th year together."
This meant Justin had been unfaithful even before our separation, 5 years prior, when we were still living together and our marriage hadn't yet broken down. So I could rightfully claim compensation for his infidelity. His lies, once thought to be hidden, were now exposed, and Justin started to tremble. He dropped the documents onto the desk, his eyes vacant, and looked speechless. After 5 minutes, he managed to utter,
What should I do?"
As if waiting for those words, I leaned forward.
I'll be claiming $30,000 from you for the infidelity and the emotional distress you've caused me. And from your mistress, I'll claim $10,000.
These amounts were the maximum claimable amount, based on standard rates. Faced with such a hefty sum, Justin started to panic.
"I can't pay that. It's not just about not being able to pay. If I pay that amount, it will ruin my life."
Expecting an excuse like that from him, I presented my next proposition. Then, let's settle it with a property division for the compensation. However, child support is a separate matter. You'll be paying for all of Tracy's expenses, high school and even university. Understood? When Justin objected, I added, if you argue about that, I'll go to court for enforcement proceedings. Faced with this reality, Justin had no choice but to sign the documents prepared by my lawyer. Finally, the long battle came to a close. Eventually, Justin and I officially divorced, and the financial matters were settled through property division. Justin had almost no savings left after squandering his money on his mistress. In the end, I managed to keep the savings I had diligently accumulated over the years. Naturally, the divorce left Justin penniless, which must have been a severe blow for him. Fearful of his employer finding out, he has been diligently paying child support every month. Tracy, as if to spite him, studied hard and was accepted into a prestigious private university. I can only imagine the look on Justin's face when he received the bill for her tuition. The woman Justin had an affair with reluctantly paid me compensation right before she was arrested and eventually convicted of marriage fraud. It appears she had multiple victims, all of whom she had led on with promises of marriage. Justin really lacked judgment. He lost everything: his family, money, and girlfriend. On top of that, his relationships with his parents, relatives, and friends have all broken down. Had he known that a single thrill-seeking venture outside his marriage would lead to such despair, he probably wouldn't have done it. But Justin lacked such foresight. Now he leads a lonely life, just paying child support and commuting between work and home. It turns out his workplace found out about everything through neighborhood gossip, leading him to be scorned and feeling miserable. Never underestimate the power of local gossip networks. Justin certainly learned that the hard way. Meanwhile, I returned to my family home to support my father, living a peaceful life. One day, as Tracy was about to graduate from college, she brought home a seemingly nice young man, saying he was her boyfriend. My father was moved to tears at the prospect of his granddaughter's marriage, and I finally felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. A few months later, at Tracy's wedding, as I lowered her veil in her pure white dress, Tracy, with tears in her eyes, said,
"Mom, thank you for raising me. I promise I will be happy."
Attending my beloved daughter Tracy's wedding filled me with joy. Having parted ways with a terrible husband and seeing Tracy in her wedding dress was enough to fulfill my heart. And with that, I decided to cherish every minute and second of the rest of my life.
Seriously, don't go having kids with a guy you've broken up with, okay? Oh, could it be that you can't forget about me? Thinking about having a kid would mean you're still connected to me in some way. How noble of you, huh? Hey, what's up with that?
It's really ridiculous. Looking back, breaking up was definitely the right decision. Being with such a delusional man, I would never have been able to find the happiness I have now. Today, I want to talk about my unforgettable dark history and the rebellion that followed. My name is Maggie. I'm a 53-year-old homemaker who finds joy in doing housework while watching the morning news show. Back then, I was 38, living a peaceful life with my husband, Tony, or so it seemed. But around that time, a sense of unease started to flow through our home. Tony would respond to my words with,
"So what?"
or,
"And?"
in a strangely oppressive or indifferent manner. When I tried to continue the conversation with, "So you see," he'd cut me off with,
"I'm busy."
It felt dismissive, as if I was being brushed aside. It wasn't that he had always been like this. If anything, he was a talkative person who liked to joke around and make me laugh whenever he had the chance. But then this transformation happened. It was such a sudden change. I wondered if I had done something wrong, but couldn't think of anything specific. One day I found a faint lipstick mark on the back of a shirt Tony had sent for laundry. The day he wore that shirt, he came home late, saying he had to work overtime. It's hard to imagine someone at his male-dominated workplace leaning on his back with lipstick on. If there was such a person, that would be too scary to imagine. Could it be a woman? I naturally came to that conclusion, but a lipstick stain alone is hardly proof. There are endless excuses one could make, like bumping into someone by accident. I decided to wait and gather more evidence, carefully watching for any unusual behavior in Tony. Ironically, just paying a little more attention led to a plethora of evidence of infidelity. For example, Tony would always get up to go to the bathroom around 2 a.m. when sleeping at night. I had never doubted him before, but it turned out he was using that time to talk to a woman on the phone. There were times when long hairs would come out from the inside of his suit, and sometimes upon closer inspection, his handkerchief seemed to have wiped something resembling lipstick. The clincher was when I borrowed Tony's car after a long time and found a colored lip balm. Unless Tony was into using colored lip balm, this was the most undeniable evidence yet. 10 years into our marriage, the frustration of having my husband stolen by some newcomer and the pure loneliness and resurgence of affection for my husband made me wonder, can we really not start over? Is there no way to make him look back at me once more? Isn't there a way to rekindle something that has cooled down? As I was pondering this, the possibility of my pregnancy became apparent. It's a gift from God to be pregnant at this timing, goes without saying. We didn't have children. Perhaps the monotony in our relationship was the cause of Tony's infidelity. Maybe this pregnancy could bring about a change. With that hope, I brought up the pregnancy to Tony. But...
"What? Give me a break, that's so annoying. Let's break up."
I couldn't believe my ears. Well, in hindsight, I realized my judgment and expectations were too naive. The chances of a man who's cheating coming back to his partner are slim to none. It's not like in the trendy dramas where things work out smoothly. But back then, I truly believed that since we married out of love, we can surely get back together. Can you really say that? It's your child.
Even so, a child is better off without a father like me. Besides, you've realized it too, right?
Seeing Tony's smirking face made my heart jump.
That I'm cheating.
Pretending not to know about my husband's affair and plotting to return to a relationship as if nothing happened because of my pregnancy felt like being pushed off a cliff. At that time I thought, If the affair comes to light, our relationship will become tense, and Tony will never come back. However, I was mistaken.
I did all sorts of things wanting you to find out, but you never said anything. I got tired of waiting.
What?
I was waiting for you to say, this is unforgivable, let's get divorced. Man, you're making me work too hard.
You were kidding, right?
I wouldn't make up such a hassle. I have a cute 24-year-old girlfriend now. A 38-year-old? About to get pregnant and gain weight? I have no use for an old lady like that anymore.
After saying that, Tony added a predictable dad joke.
If you get pear-shaped, you're useless.
And laughed out loud by himself. Not funny at all.
Here, take this. I'll pay compensation or whatever, just sign it already.
What he presented was a divorce paper. Afterwards, I cried for 3 days and nights, and finally, as Tony stopped coming home, I made up my mind and signed the divorce papers. 5 years later, I was afraid of getting older and being single, but fortunately, I remarried my childhood friend Alex, who is also divorced, and we've been living modestly with our child. Alex, too, had been cheated on by his wife, an experienced veteran of a messy divorce. Because we both shared the same pain, living with him felt very comfortable. He would book a fancy restaurant for our anniversary every year and give me somewhat expensive gifts on my birthday. I felt cherished. I wish these days could continue forever. As I thought so, we welcomed our anniversary this year. A pleasant meal at the usual fancy restaurant was supposed to happen.
Whoa, it's Maggie.
The one who grimaced upon seeing my face was my ex-husband. What? Why are you here? I couldn't hide my disgust. What a tragedy. I had accidentally encountered my ex-husband coming out of the bathroom.
What? It's a business reception. Unlike you hanging around looking bored, I'm busy. Huh?
My ex-husband suddenly glanced behind me and approached quickly.
Huh. So you had the kid we made that time. That's just creepy.
Saying that, he pulled up the child's hand and started saying outrageous things while looking closely.
Seriously, don't go having kids with a guy you've broken up with, huh? Oh, could it be that you can't forget about me? Thinking that having a kid would mean you're still connected to me in some way. How noble of you, huh? Hey, what's up with that?
My ex-husband, while smirking and seemingly enjoying himself, spun the child around right there. The child's face gradually distorted and started crying out loud.
Daddy! Mommy! Help! A stranger is taking me away!
No, I'm your daddy, and your mommy is right there. You're just like her, a silly kid.
The moment my ex-husband said that, a man over 6.3 feet tall appeared from behind and grabbed my ex-husband's arm firmly.
This child is mine, you know? Huh?
Seeing my bewildered ex-husband, I almost burst into laughter.
Huh? This person, Maggie's remarried partner?
Without answering my ex-husband's question,
I don't know what you've been saying, but you don't think making someone's son cry will go without consequences, do you?
The tall man said, glaring at my ex-husband. Glancing at the arm, a tattoo peeked out, causing my ex-husband's face to turn pale instantly.
Hey, Maggie, stop your husband. Huh? That woman is not my wife. Huh?
My ex-husband was puzzled again, looking back and forth between me, the man, and the crying child.
Huh? What? Then what's the deal with this kid?
Before he knew it, my ex-husband was tied up by the tall man.
This man is a suspicious individual repeating nonsensical things. Someone call the waiter. There's a person here harming a child.
The man's shout stirred the restaurant. So much for our important anniversary. It turned into quite the day, while I smirked to myself. It turned out to be a good day, even if by accident. Waiter, over here. I saw this man forcibly grabbing the child's arm. My words left my ex-husband gaping.
What? Hey, Maggie, what? What's going on? Seriously, I have no idea what's happening.
As my husband frantically shouted, I said to him, I'm not the wife of that man, and that child is neither mine nor yours.
But you were right behind him.
You were standing in the narrow passage by the toilet entrance, blocking the child from entering. This child was simply following his dad into the restroom when you interfered.
What?
You might want to make a fool out of people, but jumping into conclusions should be kept in moderation. Why don't you pay more attention to your surroundings?
What? Shut up. You have no right to tell me that.
Right. A suspicious person wouldn't get my gracious words, would they?
I'm not a suspicious person.
Oh, please. Any man who speaks to an unknown child and grabs their arm using baby talk like I'm your daddy is suspicious, no matter how you look at it.
That's because...
And then, your mom is right there, isn't she? Do you still think you're married to me? As I smirked, my ex-husband's face turned red, and he shouted,
Don't mess with me.
However, the louder he was, the tighter the nearby man gripped him.
Ouch. Hey, man. Let go. I'm innocent. Innocent? It's undeniable that you made our precious son cry, isn't it? But that's a misunderstanding.
Quickly, I said, but it's a fact that you misconstrued and laid hands on someone else's son. Tony glared at me and said,
You.
Oh no, I'm being glared at by a suspicious person. How scary. Though I said it flatly, pretending to be cute seemed to irritate him just right as my ex-husband started to struggle wildly to free himself. Considering you still think you're married to me, oh, could it be that you can't forget about me? I deliberately said what my ex-husband had said to me earlier. As expected, he got angry, and sensing danger, the man then rolled him onto the floor and pinned him down.
You thought you could get out of my grip? Big mistake.
Well, it might be a light threat from the man, but the tattoos added a real sense of danger. My ex-husband must have thought,
Today might be the day I die. Hey, Maggie, say something, will ya? It's a misunderstanding.
But pulling up someone else's child's hand is neither a misunderstanding nor anything else.
I thought he was my child.
My ex-husband became almost tearful, sounding like a child, and I burst out laughing. Claiming my child without acknowledgement or child support?
What?
Did I ever discuss recognition or child support with you after we got divorced?
No, I wasn't planning to recognize it anyway. You knew that, so you didn't contact me, right?
Are you stupid? I wouldn't do such a foolish thing while raising a child alone. Admit it. I would have pursued you relentlessly until you paid.
Huh? Then why?
Back then, the pregnancy test was wrong. I wasn't pregnant after all. The gynecologist confirmed it, so I decided to sign the divorce papers. Indeed, during those 3 days when the divorce was discussed and my husband stopped coming home, I did cry. However, with a child on the way, I couldn't just divorce without understanding the situation, so I first went to the gynecologist. Even if I were to divorce, I wanted to sort out things like compensation, child support, and future living expenses. If not, divorcing meant the child could benefit, I was willing to endure. However, the gynecologist found no signs of pregnancy, but instead discovered a tumor in my ovaries. During surgery for that tumor, I happened to share a room with the mother of my current husband, Alex. Since Alex and I were childhood friends, I knew his parents. Reconnecting with Alex during his visit, we grew close again. I once thought this pregnancy was a blessing for a child with my husband and a gift from God at this timing. However, it actually brought me to a partner with whom I could truly say it was right to leave my ex-husband and allowed for the early detection of my illness. And last year, despite having one ovary removed, I had a child with my current husband. It seemed like a series of unfortunate events, but for me, it was actually filled with good fortune. Knowing everything, my ex-husband's face turned pale, muttering,
No way, I was dumped by that woman.
Laughing at the fact that he was dumped goes without saying. Well, it's obvious a young girl wouldn't want to be with an aging man like him. That's when the police arrived, called by someone from the restaurant. My ex-husband received a stern warning from the police. The misunderstanding was cleared up and he apologized profusely to the child's family, avoiding making a big deal out of it. It seems being scolded by the police was quite damaging. He even apologized to me. Since my ex-husband doesn't know where I live now, he actually went to my parents' house to convey his apologies.
I was wrong for the way we parted.
As he got older and was abandoned by his affair partner, no one paid him any attention, and he seemed to feel the loneliness of having no one to console him. Well, it's too late for apologies now. I continue to ignore my ex-husband. If we hadn't met there, honestly, I would have gradually forgotten about him. By the way, noticing I hadn't returned to my seat for a while, my current husband, Alex, had come to the restroom to fetch me. However, he decided to watch from the shadows, thinking,
This might be Maggie's first and last chance to get back at her ex-husband. Of course, I was ready to jump in if anything happened, but that man restraining him was just too strong.
"Oh, that guy used to be the captain of a football team."
No wonder he's strong. No place for me then. I was terrified. I thought he was from some dangerous profession.
Laughing at this, I joined in. Normally, one might say, that's not very manly, but my husband didn't have to deal with my ex, and I thought it was a problem I should solve myself. I realized I lacked strength during the divorce. Despite everything, my actions at the time were merely following my ex-husband's and his affair partner's demands, receiving only a nominal amount of compensation. Reality doesn't always progress like fairy tales, so it wasn't possible to demand a hefty compensation, and I had lost the strength to resist. But in the end, being able to speak my mind to my ex-husband with unwavering intent, I believe I became truly strong. Now I can face my husband and child proudly. Coincidentally, this year's anniversary has become a new beginning for me. Currently, with my husband working as a freelance first-class architect and our income doubled, I've quit my part-time job to enjoy being a full-time housewife. Our slightly rebellious daughter complains when asked to do something, but quietly helps out when not asked. Having only one daughter due to a late pregnancy, our family of 3, plus 2 dogs, lives a lively daily life. Despite not having children with my ex-husband and only one ovary, I was able to conceive and give birth at an advanced age with my current husband. This, in a way, might also be fate. The dream of marrying my special destined partner that I secretly admired as a child, I never thought it would come true through remarriage. Such dreamy thoughts cross my mind as I cherish the everyday happiness that seems ordinary but is anything but.
Since I'm going out with her, it's time for us to get divorced. Take your daughter and get out of here. That's how it is. Sorry, Mrs., okay? With expressions and tones that seemed utterly devoid of remorse. My husband and his mistress, standing beside him, said so right in front of me and my daughter, a middle school student. And they brazenly put their arms around each other as if to show off. Lately, I somehow started to suspect my husband might be cheating, as his time of returning home became increasingly late. Hey, why have you been coming home so late recently? Stop nagging, I'm working overtime. Don't bother me when I'm this tired. Despite his answer, I couldn't believe he was really working overtime, especially as I could smell women's perfume on him. However, without conclusive evidence, I couldn't confront him. But then, one day, he brought his mistress home and told us to leave. From now on, it's just the 2 of us living in this house. That's right. This house and all its assets will be mine. My daughter and I packed our things and left the house, understanding that arguing was futile. I worried that showing my daughter her father's infidelity might have hurt her, especially during her adolescence. I apologized to her, but oddly, she smiled happily. We did it, Mom. Because those 2 are. My name is Rebecca Hansen. I am a working mother, working from home and living with my older husband, Andrew, and our middle school second-year daughter, Lucy. Lucy is right in the middle of her adolescence. And while she could be entering a rebellious phase, she hasn't shown any signs of it yet. She is always calm and cheerful, and being around her is soothing. On days without club activities, Lucy helps with shopping and dinner, growing up to be a kind child. She has even started to cook meals like pasta and stew on her own, especially when I'm too busy with work to prepare food. Lucy loves to talk, and during dinner, she shares various events of her day with me, such as club activities, plans with friends, and her growing interest in mathematics. Hearing this, I'm glad to imagine her enjoying her school life. However, she talks freely only with me. In front of Andrew, she hardly speaks, her expression stiffens, and her smile fades. She speaks only the minimum necessary. It's said that girls can become cold toward their fathers during adolescence. but I felt there was more to it than just a phase. Andrew hasn't been really involved in housework or parenting. Even when Lucy was younger and needed more care, Andrew would return from work and immediately seclude himself in his room, making no effort to interact with his daughter. I wish you would do a bit more around the house or spend some time with Lucy. I might be home, but I have work that I can't always put aside, you know? My appeals were met only with sighs, leading me to give up on asking for his help with household chores and parenting. Though Lucy's help has somewhat reduced the burden, my frustration with Andrew's continued indifference remains. Why doesn't Dad do any housework at all? He won't even wash his own dishes or tidy up the documents he spreads out in the living room. Yet, he tells me to make sure I clean up. Lucy expressed her frustration to me when we were alone. It was understandable that she felt irritated. Pondering what to do, I find myself sighing deeply when I'm alone. Andrew started to yell at Lucy and me about 2 years ago. Before, he would either ignore us or just sigh in response to anything we said, but recently, he has begun responding with shouts of anger. I find myself missing the times when he would just ignore us. Please, I need you to help out with the housework. You know, I'm getting very busy at work lately. To this, he would retort, what? I'm out working from morning till night, exhausted. You're always at home, so you should be able to handle it. He would yell with an intensity that brooks no argument, his eyes full of anger and his foot tapping with irritation. A menacing presence that leaves me speechless. Why has he become like this? He wasn't like this when we met. If he were, I would have never married him. We had something in common when we met. Both of us had lost parents. My parents died in an accident just as I was starting my career. Andrew's parents died of an illness, though he never specified which. His proposal was, since both of us know the pain of losing loved ones all too well, I think we can build a warm family together. I will never make you feel sad, so please marry me. During our dating period, he was very kind, and I thought I would be happy with him. That's why I accepted his proposal, but now I wonder. Instead of sadness, anger accumulates day by day. When it's just Lucy and me, the house is warm. But as soon as Andrew comes home and starts shouting, the atmosphere becomes tense and prickly. Of course, the thought of divorce has crossed my mind. But when I think of Lucy, I can't help feeling it's better for her to have a father. Even someone like him. I have no parents or relatives to turn to for advice. Having lost my parents, I've become sensitive to the loss of family, feeling a deep fear of it. So even when the thought of divorce comes to mind, I immediately shake it off. Thanks to Lucy, I've been able to endure. But she will soon be a high school student. To save up for her examination fees and high school entrance costs, I've been putting money into a separate account for her education for many years. It should have accumulated to a considerable amount. However, one day, I found the account balance was 0. The shocking number, 0, displayed on the ATM screen. I was bewildered, searching for a reason but could only think that Andrew had something to do with it. I had never touched this money, using the cash card only to deposit money. Hey, did you withdraw money from Lucy's education account? Since I hadn't given Lucy the cash card or passbook, only Andrew could have withdrawn it. When he came home, I confronted him, but he refused to answer. Instead, he said, "Why does it matter if a woman doesn't go to school? Even if she takes exams, it's pointless, so it doesn't matter if the tuition money is gone." What? What are you talking about? Anger made my voice come out lower than it ever had. Lucy wants to go to high school, and isn't it a parent's duty to support her? And yet, to say that education is unnecessary because she's a woman? I wish he would stop belittling people. This response almost confirmed to me that he was the one who withdrew the tuition. If he had nothing to do with it, he would at least show some surprise at the money being gone. However, he casually made his previous statement. I unleashed my anger on him. Although I had always shrunk back in fear of being yelled at whenever I showed even the slightest defiance. This time I did not back down and kept arguing with him. Andrew's attitude remained consistent, never wavering from his biased view that women don't need education. Can you really call that a true family? When I confided in a close friend about Andrew, she responded with these words. Can you really call someone a father if he squanders money behind your back? And then insults Lucy like that? I nodded so much in agreement with her words that I thought my head might fall off. If you care about Lucy, cutting off such a father might actually be kinder to her. That's right, I had avoided choosing divorce thinking it was for Lucy's sake. But I was wrong. I began to consider that divorcing might be better for both her and myself. A week has passed since then. Dad is really the worst. Her cold voice echoed in the living room, slightly trembling as if trying to contain her anger. Her fists clenched so tightly it looked like her nails might dig into her skin. She found out that Andrew had withdrawn money from the account meant for her school fees. I had told her about the existence of that account. Thanks, Mom. I'll work hard to pass the exams for my preferred school. She had expressed her gratitude with a sparkling smile. But now, her expression was dark with despair. With a cold look filled with hatred, she glared sharply at Andrew. After muttering the worst again, she slammed the door and locked herself in her room. Perhaps being reprimanded by her daughter might have a greater effect on Andrew than anything I could say. However, when I looked at him, he seemed bewildered, as if he had no idea what had happened. What's with her? Such a cheeky attitude towards her father. It must be because of your poor upbringing, right? Despite it being his own fault, he directed his anger at me. It's astounding that he would use such words here. It's only natural for Lucy to be angry. Andrew had no right to be outraged. He refused to acknowledge his fault. Then, his returns home began to get even later. Although he used to come home by 8 p.m. even on days with overtime, it gradually shifted to 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and then there were days he wouldn't return even after 11 p.m. Hey, why have you been coming home so late recently? Stop nagging, I'm working overtime. Don't bother me when I'm this tired. I wondered if it was really overtime. My distrust in him grew, not just because of his late returns, but also because I could smell a floral perfume on him. At first, it was a faint scent, but over time the fragrance became stronger. It might be the scent from someone at work, but it was too strong to be just that. However, without proof, I couldn't confront him. Days went by without Andrew and Lucy speaking a word to each other. The gap between them, caused by the school fees issue, grew deeper. Then, one day, after a long while, around 7 p.m., I heard the front door open. Andrew had returned. Until then talking cheerfully, Lucy's expression vanished the moment he did. I felt something was off when I heard his footsteps approaching the living room, accompanied by a woman's laughter. His voice responded to her giggles. As he appeared in the living room, both Lucy and I were speechless at the sight of Andrew. We hadn't seen him smiling like this for a long time. And an obviously much younger woman was standing behind him. The strong perfume that wafted around her overpowered the scent of the dinner I was preparing. It was the same scent I had started to notice a while ago. Stunned, we looked at Andrew and the woman, while they were wearing a relaxed smile. Excuse me, but who is this? I asked tentatively, and they turned towards each other, smugly putting their arms around one another as if to flaunt their relationship. This is Stacy Hill. We're dating. That's how it is. Sorry, Mrs., okay? With a drawn-out voice, Stacy made an irritating remark. Her expression and tone suggested she didn't think she was doing anything wrong. My suspicion that Andrew might be cheating was unfortunately confirmed. So, we're getting divorced. Take Lucy and get out. Don't be silly. Did he bring Stacy back just to have this conversation? Lucy glared at Andrew and Stacy in turn, with eyes full of intense anger. You can't just suddenly say something like that. Aww. Andrew doesn't have feelings for you anymore, ma'am. Her way of calling me was a real shock to me. Indeed, I'm in my early 40s. Perhaps to someone in their 20s like Stacy, I might appear that way. But I felt anger at being looked down upon by someone engaging in an affair. Just so you know, I'll be demanding compensation from you. Why would you demand it from me? It's absurd for me to pay when they are the ones who cheated. Why? Because you and your daughter neglected me. It's compensation for hurting my feelings. Andrew spoke brazenly and frivolously, presumably referring to our complaints about him misusing the education funds. But that was entirely his fault. So hurry up and leave. Stacy and I are gonna live here from now on. That's right. This house and its assets will be mine. Lucy and I quickly packed our belongings and left the house. A friend agreed to let us stay with them. I'm sorry, Lucy. It's my fault for clinging to someone like him for so long, causing you distress. I might have left a scar on her by exposing her father's infidelity. However, Lucy seemed oddly happy. We did it, Mom. Huh? Confused by her words, I looked at her closely. Then, she whispered something to me. Later, we found ourselves facing Andrew and Stacy again. Accompanied by a lawyer, we were there for the divorce mediation. Stacy was smirking, her arm intertwined with Andrew's. I was almost impressed they could display such shamelessness in front of a third party. We demand compensation for the affair, as well as repayment for the misused education funds. When I stated this matter-of-factly, they didn't seem surprised, smiling foolishly as they responded. What nonsense are you talking about? Do you have any proof that I used the savings? Yes, I have one right here. Andrew, not expecting evidence, stared at the proof I presented. This evidence wasn't collected by me, but by Lucy. In fact, she had realized Andrew was cheating, and had also caught wind that he was squandering her education fund on his mistress. Wait, this is different from what we discussed. I can't defend you like this. The lawyer frowned and whispered to Andrew. Though they thought they were being quiet, their voices carried clearly to me. They must have planned to blame me for the divorce with false accusations. However, the divorce was finalized with Andrew being at fault, and we were able to obtain a lump sum payment for the compensation and the misused savings. Andrew acted nonchalantly, saying, "Well, it's not a significant amount." Despite being deserted by his lawyer, and having to pay a substantial sum including Stacy's compensation. One might wonder why he remained smug, but I knew the reason. Looking down so they couldn't see my face, I secretly lifted the corners of my mouth into a smile. Half a year later, I received a call. The caller ID showed my now ex-husband, Andrew. I picked up the vibrating phone without hesitation, having anticipated he might contact me eventually. Hello? How are you doing? How am I doing? Thanks to you, I'm in a mess. It was certainly not my fault. He was merely facing the consequences of his own actions. So, what's the trouble? Don't play dumb. Why did you tell my parents about the divorce and everything? He raised his voice in anger. Since it was a phone call, I couldn't see his face, and he couldn't lash out at me physically. I responded without fear. Well, if we're getting divorced, it's only right to inform the parents, isn't it? But why? He mumbled something in return, probably wondering how I knew his parents were alive. Actually, Andrew's parents weren't dead. So why had he lied all along? It was to monopolize their inheritance. His parents were quite wealthy, meaning their inheritance would be substantial. Being an only child, Andrew thought he could secure a large sum of money for himself if he kept his parents' existence a secret from me. He also hadn't told his parents about his marriage. During her investigation into Andrew's affair, Lucy discovered and informed me that his parents were actually alive. Lucy had been sneakily checking the phone book and making notes of her grandparents' contact information, seizing the moment whenever Andrew was in the bath. Dad had them saved under a dad and a mom, so it was easy to find. Lucy was smiling proudly. Then, I secretly called his parents to explain everything. Of course, they didn't believe me right away. What? Andrew was married. He never showed any signs of that to us. However, with persistent explanation, I managed to convince them. Rebecca, if there's anything we can do, please tell us. I leaned on his parents, prepared to ask for their help if Andrew made a fuss during the divorce mediation. But unexpectedly, he complied with our demands for compensation without issue. He planned to ask his parents for money. The funds Andrew used during the mediation weren't from his savings but borrowed money. His money had nearly all gone to Stacy, his much younger mistress whom he couldn't resist spoiling. Whatever Stacy wanted, whether it was jewelry, clothes, or dining at fancy restaurants, Andrew was willing to provide. Marrying Andrew seems like it would lead to such a happy life. While Stacy was pleased, Andrew was far from calm internally, knowing her demands would continue. Yet, he had no money left. Then, he remembered his parents, thinking they could bail him out if necessary. However, life is not that easy. Once they learned everything, his parents disowned him. Not a single penny of the inheritance will go to you. It will go to Lucy. After the divorce was finalized, Andrew showed up at his parents' home, only to be met with this declaration by his father. He had lost everything after the divorce. He was fired from his job after debt collectors harassed him. Stacy also disappeared after quitting her job, likely due to Andrew's debt. With his parents cutting ties, Andrew had no one left to turn to. That's when I had a bad feeling. Just when I thought it was merely a call filled with complaints, I found myself bracing for the possibility that he might actually propose remarriage. Please, will you marry me again? Then I wouldn't have to pay you compensation for the affair, right? As expected, I rubbed my forehead in frustration and deliberately let out a loud sigh, audible enough for him to hear over the phone. He probably thought that by remarrying me, he could avoid compensation payments and possibly reverse his disinheritance. But there was no advantage for me in this. After all he and Stacy Hill had put me and Lucy through, the nerve of such a proposition was astounding. Where are you now? I'll come over so we can talk. Don't come. Besides, we've moved. I cut him off sharply, and for a moment, Andrew was at a loss for words. If you try to find out our address and show up, I will call the police. I will never remarry you. You've made your bed, now lie in it. With that, I hung up without waiting for a reply. Later, he appeared at our place once, seemingly underestimating my resolve to actually call the police. However, my threat was not idle. The realization that I was serious must have hit him when I called the police, as he never showed up again. Having overcome the significant ordeal of her father's infidelity, Lucy successfully passed her entrance exams. Invited by my in-laws for a celebration, we enjoyed a feast together. Congratulations on your acceptance, Lucy. You've done well. They praised her warmly, making us feel incredibly welcome. Despite initially being nervous, Lucy soon began to engage in conversation, smiling Rebecca, this is just a suggestion, and you can refuse if you don't like it, but with this preface, my in-laws proposed the idea of adoption. For me, who had lost parents, it was an incredibly attractive offer. Lucy had also grown fond of them. Believing we could find happiness living together, I accepted their proposal. Now, Lucy and I are spending our days peacefully with our new family.